Hello and welcome to the Dad Dialogue podcast, the show where we talk about the successes and the stresses of being a dad and becoming a dad. Welcome to a very special episode of the Dad Diary Deep Dive. Today we are doing a Dad Diary Deep Dive into health, looking at men's health or father's health specifically. And I just want to share a little bit about why I've chosen this topic. I'll kind of outline what we're going to dive into and then we'll just get into it. So the reason I've chosen this topic is my father passed away when I was kind of 22, 23 years old. So he never got to meet my now wife. He never got to meet his grandkids, and longevity and the choices that we make now have just been playing on my mind a lot recently, the last kind of 6 months or so, thinking about what can I do now to ensure that I have a large quantity of life as well as a good quality of life, kind of going further into the future, being there at my kids' graduations, being there when they get married, being there when they have their own kids. So that's kind of the reason why I've chosen this topic, and that's just a little personal experience as to why we are doing this. So we're going to look at a few different factors. First of all, being kind of mental health and friendships and social circles, then the diet and food, exercise, and then a little bit about hobbies and a little bit about longevity. Throughout the whole episode, you'll be hearing from me, my own personal experience. You'll also be hearing some clips from other guests that have been on the Dad Dialogue interviews before. I find it really useful to share these clips, and I think bringing these different voices together is a really powerful tool, as well as obviously looking through the data, the research and studies and blog posts and so on and so on. So if you've heard the previous Dad Diary Deep Dives, you know what the format is. So we're going to dive into kind of just looking at a general overview of father's health, and then we're going to dive into a little bit of mental health. So I just want to start off by lifting up this guy called Dr. Craig Garfield. He's done a lot of research into the health of fathers, really, really valuable researcher. He popped up all the time as I was kind of doing some research here. So very, very useful researcher and doctor has gone into this. Links to everything I talk about will be in a little Google Doc in the description. So go and click on that if you look at it. It'll be in chronological order. So I just got a few quotes from him. He says there's a small but definitely growing body of literature on fathers that show that cognitively children who have involved fathers have better linguistic abilities. They have higher academic readiness and ultimately higher academic achievement. They have a better social, emotional well-being. They're coping better there, and they show more maturity and more pro-social behaviours and have secure attachments. That's just to say, as I think we all know at this point, that having the dad around is good. It's a positive for the children. He also said that the vast majority of men, 80% of them, said in a specific survey that he conducted himself with some fathers in front of him in Chicago and Milwaukee, 80% of these fathers said that they try and eat better now, they try and exercise more, and they try and avoid risky situations too after having their first child. So that's quite a lot. 80% is obviously a big number. It's not a huge study, but I found that really interesting. I'm curious if you think you're making better choices now as you were doing beforehand. But then he kind of wondered what that would look like on a bigger scale. So he actually started to do a big study that would look over a longer amount of time. And the results are actually quite different to what he expected. He said that new fathers actually reported high depression scores after the birth of their child. That's what he was finding. So to quote him again, what we found is that for those dads that are actually living in the house with the baby, that in the 5 years before they became a father, their depressive symptom scores, which were measured at 4 different times across this 20 years, were decreasing. And once they had the baby in the next 5 years, there was an increase in those depressive symptom scores. And that increase in the depressive symptom scores for the average participant in the study was about 68%. So that's quite a large number for a start, 68%. And obviously, if we're talking about depressive symptom scores, we're going to talk a little bit about mental health in this early stage. It's kind of where my research kind of led me to go into. He also said that he also found that, there was changes to fathers' bodies as well. So he also said that what we found is that men who are fathers who do not live with their child on average in the sample, they gained about 3.5 pounds. But once you become a dad, in resident fathers, so men who live with the children, gain on average 4.5 pounds. So that was an interesting finding. We're going to dive into a little bit about why we maybe gain weight as we become a father and what the different aspects are. We're going to look at obviously diet and exercise and how that plays a part. But this initial research, this what I'm sharing here, is just some of the stats, some of the data that kind of shows that it is important to think about. It's important to look at. There is some research there, but I think there could be more. So he conducted another systematic review of other papers so diving into the mental health aspect here, he looked at papers that were looking at suicidal thoughts and ideation in males that were 25 and 44 years old, in that age range of typical new fathers. So research into this area for new fathers is limited, but he did find that approximately 1 in 10 fathers experienced clinically significant depressive symptoms during this time. So I've now mentioned depressive symptoms a couple of times. If you're not sure what those are, I would suggest kind of pausing the podcast, go and do a little bit of research. I could sit here and read off an article about what depressive symptoms might look like, but I think kind of sharing in any detail about this is a little bit kind of out of my area of expertise, and I'd rather just kind of leave that kind of for you to kind of wrestle with and battle with, because I've had my own experiences with depression, and I've had my own, I know of other people that have dealt with it. So I think kind of taking my bias into account is important. And I think if you're not aware of what they might look like, go and do a bit of research and just kind of inform yourself on that. And I found it super interesting that doing just the research into generic father's health came up this result of depression and depressive symptoms very early on. That was like the kind of where my research went initially. And there was one more thing that as a kind of a couple more articles that are in there that I've got a couple of quotes from them. That fatherhood is a social detriment of your health, and understanding its influence may provide opportunities to improve men's health. So just confirming that people who are not fathers tend to, on average, be a little bit healthier than people who are fathers, men, that is, and obviously factoring the different other factors of age and what have you. And then another really important thing is that fathers take on lots of different roles during a birth, leading up to a birth and after the birth, helping their partner, being a parent, and they face lots of difficulties that are not necessarily talked about as much. There might be social stigmas, there are barriers to what's happening, the views of not being present around the household, maybe not making enough, the stress of providing enough, and the postnatal mental health is generally overlooked. And to quote this thing, it's almost leaving men to fend for themselves. So mental health is super important. I think it's very, very obvious that this is really important in new fathers, and that, postnatal depression is possible for fathers, and it's really important to be on the lookout for it. And knowing what the symptoms are of different mental health disorders can obviously help address them when they come, and seek professional help if need be. I think there's only so much that people can do through listening to podcasts or talking to other people. Like, if they need professional help, they need professional help. And it's really important to do that if you think you need that. But we're going to talk a little bit about friendships and the benefits of social circles. And they kind of go hand in hand, I think, because if you have a solid social circle, you have a solid friendship group, then you might realize, hey, I need to lean on a professional help here. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about friendships and social circles. Got a link to another study there that's saying that having close friends is important for a father's mental health, and the fathers without close friends are more likely to experience increased stress levels in the first 12 months of becoming a father. And some men lose friendships as they enter fatherhood. And a fifth of fathers say that the number of close friends they had decreased in the 12 months after becoming a father. So, that's just quite sad, really. And I think it's really important that we are lifting men up. We're kind of admitting that we need help, that we need social circles to do this together, that we need to make friends and keep friends. And I think it's really important to do that. So I've got a couple of clips to share for you. Got a clip from Mitch. Mitch runs the Dad Nation podcast. He's a coach. He helps other men. And I think he's got a lot of information. He's got some stats to share about friendships, but also ways of helping men.
Okay. First of all, I would say men, depending on the man, they don't really respond well to, strong, direct, assertive, like you need to do better. So I would start by just asking questions, with your friend about, like, hey man, how's life been going? Because men aren't always necessarily comfortable talking about these things as well. So start by sharing some of your struggles. I've been having a hard time with, me and my wife haven't been communicating super well, or I've been having a hard time kind of getting through to my kids about this, or I've been struggling in my fitness, or, you take any of these categories that we talked about. Start to share first, to practice vulnerability first, to sort of break that a little bit, to make that feel more comfortable, and then start asking questions. And in this situation, if we're having a conversation, I would say something like, talk about my struggle. And I'd be like, man, how are you doing in that? Like, how are you doing in your relationship? Did you struggle with those things? And if not, like, what is something that you struggle with? Yada, yada, yada. Break the ice, have the conversation, warm them up, so to speak, and be like, hey man, I heard about this podcast, the Dad Dialogue or the Dad Nation, or heard about this free course or these resources. I'm I've actually been listening to it, and it's been super helpful for me. What do you think, man? Would you like me to send you a link? I mean, it's changed my life, and I think you'd really dig it.
Mm.
Or you could even be like, hey, man, if this is like, if you're feeling the same way, then let's just like hit a podcast together. Like, you listen to it, and we'll grab a beer after work, and we'll
Mm.
just chat through what we learned.
Yeah,
Or like we'll walk through
it's
this free
awesome.
resource together, or we'll, whatever, right? And just invite them to go on the journey with you if you
Yeah.
want, right? That's how I would approach it. That's how I have
Mm.
approached in the past with my friends, for sure.
So yeah, I think that's a really useful thing from Mitch to kind of think about how we can help other men and be there for each other and kind of help support, because the stats don't lie. Now, before becoming a stay-at-home dad, I read this book, The Ultimate Stay-at-Home, by an author called Shannon Carpenter. He mentioned in this book about dad groups and how important it is to find a dad group and a social network of other dads to kind of do life with. So, and I've got a couple of clips from other guests who have similar stories and talk about dad groups. First, I'm going to share a clip from Joe.
Yeah, it started super organically, and I like early on I found this sort of trick. I don't know if it's a trick, but like I'd be at the park with the kids, and maybe a couple other dads are there, and eventually, you end up around them, or their kids are playing with your toys or whatever it is, and it's like, oh, are you here with the dad club? And he's like, what, a dad club? What is that? I was like, oh, you don't know?
Wow.
There's like a WhatsApp group. We meet every week on a Saturday. You're welcome to join if you want, and that works pretty well.
That's such a good trick. That's such a good little hack.
So now I have like an army of other dads who are doing this at the park.
And now a clip from Devin.
As I was transitioning to being a stay-at-home dad, Mark Zuckerberg must have figured it out and tweaked my algorithm on Instagram, because somehow I stumbled upon an account called The Natural Dads. And I'd love for you to connect with those guys eventually too. And so, because they're similar groups. So they have a podcast, and they were doing weekly Saturday walks and some dad hangs. And so I connected with them and became friends with those guys. There's a couple stay-home dads in that group, but it's also like a hodgepodge of like some guys are part-time, some guys are working full-time. But that group allowed me to kind of connect with other dads so I could empathize with. They still have the podcast going, but one of the dads moved out to Colorado. And so he asked me to spin off, kind of separate the podcast from the walks. And so now I run the Natural Dad Walks, which is like the community part of it. So I organize the walks. I'll try to go myself depending on my kids. And then sometimes I'll organize like, we call them in the States, like DNOs, dad night out. And, get the guys together to like, grab a drink at the pub and watch a game or go mini golfing or something like that. So that's what it's evolved into. And, sometimes I have these grand visions of doing other community events with like mom groups or parent groups. But at the end of the day, like, I think the MVP, like the minimal viable product I want to put out there is just like a safe space for other dads to come to. If you want to come to the walk, great. If you need other dads to connect to, like, we want to be that source for you within the Nashville area. Because I think that's hard to find. And, being with these guys and now running the walks, like I've had some incredible conversations, some really like heart to hearts with other guys about, what they struggled with as a dad, what they're struggling with now. And it just makes me feel like I'm in the right place. And if I could copy and paste that to every other major metropolitan area in the world, I wish I could. But like, it's been really great. And so that's what we're doing. We're just trying to, I think we've built the community. Now it's maintaining and maybe growing the community so other dads can feel that they can be part of it.
And it's not just being a stay-at-home parent that would lead you to want to have one of these dad groups. I think being a part of one of these dad groups is super, super valuable. You can always lean on people. And I shared in that episode with Joe of how useful it is, the dad group that we are both a part of, because we live in the same city. There are like hundreds of people in it that are often like talking about advice and, how the best plumber or the best electrician or where to go, which bank to choose for your mortgage and things like that. Really beneficial. And obviously, we still need that tighter circle of people we can talk to. But yeah, it's a really good place to start. And if you're not part of a dad group, definitely look for one in your area. If you don't know how to make one, just try and make one. Check out that episode we did with Joe. Really, really useful to learn how he started his, if you are interested in making your own. One final point is about dad groups and social circles and friendships. As a father, it was really relevant for me just kind of reflecting, putting together this episode of Dad Diary Deep Dive, and even as I was sharing about it, being reminded of all the conversations that I've had with other fathers during the interview on Dad Dialogue, where I can share clips from them. And I think that really speaks to the need that we as men have for these sorts of conversations, whether it be with people in our circle, like physically nearby us, or, talking to people online. I think can also be very beneficial, because I'm able to pull information and expertise from these different people and these different experiences to kind of bring together to form an opinion and maybe some action points for other people. It's not to say that everyone has the same opinion or even the same needs and the same desires or the same situations and contexts, but I think having those voices rattling around in your brain is super powerful to then, when you need to make a big decision for your family, that you can kind of look back on that. And it can be a little bit more challenging that if the time comes to make a big decision, there's no voices in there, or the only voices in there are maybe from more negative inputs, then that can be a really big issue. So making sure your inputs are positive and, life-giving, and just overall trying to achieve positive outcomes for your life. So that's kind of a comment on, obviously a lot of social media, but also the approach to certain aspects of even being a man that some people might prescribe online, and just ensuring that the stuff that's going in and what you're consuming is going to have an output of positivity at the end of it, because at the end of the day, you want to be a positive role model and impact on your children. I'm just going to share one more thing from this book before we dive into exercise and diet and hobbies and so on. He had a nice list, the author Shannon, he had a nice list from the American Academy of Pediatrics about risk factors for new dads. And just to say, I did look for this source online. I kind of tried to check his source, but I couldn't see it. But this is just a kind of brief overview of possible risk factors. So I think it's a useful summary of talking about what a new dad needs to be on the lookout for, and what is very, very common. So it says that there's a difficult developing an attachment with the baby and feeling excluded and jealous over mother-child bonding. If you've listened to any of the interviews that I've conducted, I think that pops up almost all the time with the dads I talk to. The lack of a good role model, that's really challenging to address. Obviously, if your father's not present, you don't have another good role model in your life, look for one, ask for help. It can help out for sure. A lack of social support, not having friends or family nearby to help you through that situation, to kind of see any changes that might happen. That's obviously, that links into the social circles and friendship groups and dad groups. Changes in marital relationship. Obviously, having a kid is going to put a strain on your marriage, and communication needs to be super, super important, super important in that sense. Lack of rewards in parenting. This definitely really rings true home for me. When I first became a stay-at-home dad, I really struggled with what the rewards were, and viewing my life as rewarding in different aspects they were rewarding. Obviously looking after my kids was rewarding, but not quite rewarding enough for me. So I needed to kind of fill in that little gap, for me to be fully satisfied. And that's where the kind of podcast was born out of. Some stay-at-home parents might be fully satisfied. Some people might be satisfied absolutely not at all, and they couldn't ever imagine being a stay-at-home parent. And that's awesome. That's just how people are different. So it can be challenging, I'm sure, even for two working individuals in a relationship, both kind of finding the reward in parenting as well. So that's always going to be an issue. You have to really be mindful of it and talk about it with your partner. Maternal depression for the mother or the father, obvious, to really be on the lookout for. Financial work stress is obviously a big risk factor we need to be aware of, and low testosterone levels, which can happen after a newborn comes into the world as well in your life. So definitely, we can talk a little bit about that later. So yeah, these are just, this is a nice kind of summary, I thought, of some of the things that can happen. And we're going to touch on a few of these as we go through. And I think that can just help kind of segment it into different sections. And if you identify something in your life, definitely address it with your partner or your friendship, or, as I said, seek professional help. So now I'm going to dive into a little bit about diet and talk about some more studies. There's another article I have here that I just wrote down. That the main point from this, the kind of summary from this study, is that fathers had worse overall cardiovascular health. You don't really need to know much more about it. The study was done, and they see that the heart conditions of fathers in general is just generally a little bit worse. It's something to be mindful of. On the Washington Post, that was talking about a study that was conducted over 10,000 men over a 20-year period, and it just found that fathers did experience weight gain and an increase in body mass index, and their body fat did increase overall in that time after becoming a father. Another article, weight gain on average of 14 pounds across the partner's pregnancy, of when your wife becomes pregnant. Apparently lots of fathers also put on weight. I'm curious to know if that is your experience as well. It was to me a little bit. And yeah, I saw there was another study that found that men's risk of obesity rises by 4% with each child that they have. So I guess those of you with lots of kids do need to be on the lookout from that. So yeah, this is just to kind of say there's scientific research that is backed up to say that in general fathers do put on weight after they become a father. That's, I think that's something that a lot of us would think about, and the research backs that up. And that was just the point I'm trying to make here. Moving into maybe the reasons why I found it a little bit more interesting and a little bit more, let's say, not in agreement. I think there are some studies, some researchers that are saying one thing, some that are saying another thing. And obviously, I think this is the sort of thing that if you have identified that you've gained some weight and want to lose weight, the context is going to look super different, and it does differ for different people. So I hope we can kind of go through some of the causes for it, so it can help us understand a little bit of what might have caused it happening, to then put in some possible interventions to help us and improve our overall health. There was another study, and this is the quote, that said, "To our knowledge, no interventions targeting perinatal weight gain have aimed specifically at fathers transitioning to parenthood. However, an Australian weight loss program geared towards fathers of older children called Healthy Dads and Healthy Kids," which was really interesting to say that there's obviously the studies that prove that, the studies that would suggest that fathers gain weight when they become a father, but there's not really much study into the actual interventions planned specifically for fathers, except for this one example that was talking about aiming at fathers and kids. This actually reminds me a lot about John, who is based in Australia, who works alongside the Fathering Project. I'm just going to play a quick clip from him.
If you've ever observed husbands and wives or groups at a cafe, you might find that all the women congregate down one end of the table, and it's a hive of conversation and of activity. And the men up the other, it's a little bit less involved in their conversation, especially when they're across the table from each other. But if you can put men shoulder to shoulder and get them involved in an activity and doing something, they tend to drop their guard a bit more and get behind what it is that they're doing. So that's what the Fathering Project's Dads and Kids events in schools is aimed to do. We have activities that dads can get hands-on with their children. And when they turn up, they don't have to sit down and watch a PowerPoint presentation. They can just come on. There's some music going in the school. There's one of our really popular events is called Paper Planes and Pizza.
So yeah, when we're talking about doing things, interventions, arranging an event, doing something that's a little bit different out of the routine, out of the ordinary, it seems to be a really big positive if it is something that's targeting fathers and their kids together, because obviously that then, appeases more than half the family, let's say. So that was a really interesting thing from John. I always appreciate hearing from him on that. And yeah, it does seem that this program called Healthy Dads, Healthy Kids did prove to be a benefit for these families in that situation as well. So that would just suggest that if you are a dad who is thinking about trying to get more active, to think about a weight loss program. Obviously weight loss program might involve exercise as well as diet, and the diet is the most important thing. That I'm not going to talk too much about that aspect. I think there's lots of research out there, lots of doctors' advice that would say you can't outrun a bad diet, and you might be in your early 20s and go to the gym 6 days a week and you can eat as much pizza as you want. I feel like I was in that situation. However, once we get older, that's not as easy to do that. So diet is super, super important. You can't lose weight and change your systems if you're still eating really, really negatively. So that weight loss program can look at targeting you as well as something with your kids. It could be something that you try and achieve together, cooking together, meal planning together, exercising together. Super beneficial. I would just comment on my own experience. I have been very mindful of trying to lose some weight and just overall become healthier. So being way more mindful of what I'm consuming. I fast more regularly. I kind of have a fasting window at the end of each day before breakfast to ensure that I'm just not late night snacking for no reason. And I do kind of just focus on eating as much protein as possible, which I'm just going to play a quick clip from Grant, who spoke about that.
Flip that, and then you start looking at nutrition. And if you want to talk mini-max there, you just make sure that you're essentially maximizing your protein content of your nutrition. there's your big rock. You've got 3 macronutrients: protein, carbohydrates, fats. Laurence, between you and me, we never need to eat another carbohydrate and we'll be fine from a health perspective. Performance might be different, but health. So your bread, rice, pasta, potato, you don't have to worry about that. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying that at all. It's just from a nutritional point of view, they're non-essential. You don't have to eat them. Fats, there's some essential fatty acids, and you have to eat those. And they're protein. So big rocks there is if you look at your plate, it should be majority protein. So if you and your wife invited my wife and I over for dinner and you cooked a spaghetti bolognese, and your wife's got, or whoever's gone to the prepared it, I would still eat it. But what you might notice is I'll just have a little bit less of the pasta and a little bit more of the meat. Like I'll just change the proportion. I'd still be respectful. I'd still, appreciate that someone's cooked a meal for me and stuff. But the big rock there is to maximize your protein content.
So yeah, I'm trying to focus on protein, eat fewer carbs, eat less sugar. I try to eat fewer processed things. I'm trying to make sure I'm eating things that are out of a packaging less. Like, yes, if I'm out and about, I might pack a protein oat bar or some beef jerky or whatever to take with me to be convenient. But if I'm at home, I try to make sure that I'm making food. I'm just kind of eating my meals, maybe eating just 3 big meals a day and trying to limit that snacking. I don't count my calories or count my macros or those sorts of things, but just trying to limit has definitely helped. And having those windows of trying, right, I'm saying that I've eaten enough today, I'm not eating anymore. I'm brushing my teeth at 6 o'clock with my kids before they go to bed, and I'm not eating anymore before I have breakfast, at 7 o'clock the next day. And I found that does definitely help me manage my diet. But yeah, the same study, they said, to quote, although physicians typically monitor weight in expectant mothers and make recommendations about healthy prenatal weight gain ranges, fathers generally receive no special medical attention during the prenatal and postpartum periods. I mean, yeah, no surprise. I found that really funny. I'm just trying to imagine an antenatal checkup when the wife's at 6 months, and for the doctor or the nurse to ask the dad to step onto the scale. I think it would be absolutely hilarious. I'm not sure if this article or the study is suggesting that that's necessary, but it's just suggesting that the data isn't there because it's not being tracked in the same way that a woman's weight is, because obviously that's super important to track the growth of the baby. But yeah, I found it really interesting that they even kind of thought to write that in this study. I just think it would be so funny to see that become a norm for dads as they go along to the antenatal classes or antenatal checkups, let's say. So yeah, maybe take that ownership yourself. If your partner is pregnant, you can think about that. Am I gaining weight right now? I'm going to just keep an eye on it to make sure that you're being healthy. And I think a lot of people have spoken about sympathetic pregnancy, which is where a man will feel some symptoms that the woman is going through because of empathy and sympathy and trying to help them out. I can look back and think that there were some similar times that I would present that sort of thing, and not necessarily the weight gain, but if my wife would say that she was having certain pains or certain cramps, I would sometimes feel that as well. And that's obviously a lot just psychological, not diving too much into that. But this same study did say that sympathetic pregnancy isn't a cause of the weight gain that men feel. And they mentioned a few other things. They said that sleep is very impactful. So it says sleep can have a big impact. It can impact hormones that help us with our diet. And sleep-deprived people may reach for sugary drinks and takeaways or skip breakfast more. Being sleep-deprived has that knock-on effect into your brain capacity to plan good meals and to eat healthily. They definitely said that hormones like testosterone can definitely affect things. They said that cortisol changes don't affect it, which I found was interesting. Stress can definitely have an effect on it as well. And the change in physical activity, which I think is very, very natural when you welcome a newborn into the world. Your routines are changed dramatically. You might be going to the gym multiple times a week. You might be playing football or, I don't know, going on a bike ride, or you might have your hobbies and that involve exercise, doing that frequently, but that might change after the newborn comes in. This particular study would suggest that diet isn't the biggest impact on a weight gain for a new father. But I find that difficult to believe, and I think the way they back that up doesn't really seem to be accurate. And there are definitely lots of other sources that say that it is because of, you can at least look at the change in habits of maybe not having time to prepare, like we just spoke about, having takeaways, more snacking, and fewer, the eating habits of just becoming less healthy. I think we all know that when it comes to diet, it's so important to think about what the habits are that we have. So that's why I mentioned me kind of stopping my eating at a certain time. That's a habit I can kind of try to work into my routine rather than just thinking to myself, oh, I'm going to eat healthier, which is obviously a bit more of a broad spectrum that doesn't really have any finite specific things attached to it. I've shared this link before, but there's a link in the description about the research that goes into bad habits and breaking bad habits. And that breaking a bad habit is really, really difficult. And it's far easier to replace that bad habit with a more positive habit, and obviously the scale of bad to good when it comes to eating is going to look different for every different context. So I'm not going to comment on, I'm going to pass no judgment on whatever habits someone might have in terms of their diet, but it's just replacing a bad habit with something that's going to have better health outcomes for your body. So that's a really useful and vital thing to think about when it comes to trying to make a change. We can't kind of move past diet without kind of talking about what it looks like for our children and what our children are eating, and how what we eat is a reflection on what could be healthy. And we can't kind of be shoving, things into our mouths and then out of that same mouth say to our kids that they can't be having certain things. So I do try my best to model to them, healthy eating. I would suggest checking out the Solid Starts. They have lots of information about obviously kids learning to eat and weaning, as well as kind of a healthy eating environment for a family. We do the whole family style thing, like our kids eat the meal that I prepare for all of us. I don't prepare them a separate meal. We all eat together. Sometimes we'll eat dinner at about 5:00, and that's what we do. And that's just works for us. And there'll be times when one of them will eat all of the food, like it'll all be in the middle, and they can like have the rice and the stew and the curry or whatever it might be in their bowls, and then they kind of decide how much they want. There'll be times where they don't want any of it, and they might just eat a few pieces of carrot or cucumber that are prepared. But I know I've seen all the research that says if you prepare that family style meal, you have some options on the table that you think they're going to at least go for that, maybe some carrot sticks or some cucumber or whatever it might be. That can be their gateway into actually eating something. And the routine of sitting down and eating is super important to my family. Like, I really believe that it's a vital part of our routine that we sit down, we eat dinner together. We're not trying to eat dinner somewhere else. Trying to be healthy, but, still enjoy the old indulgence is fair enough. I'm recording this, actually, just a bit of a side note. This is the day before UK Mother's Day. So we celebrate that as well. And I asked my kids what they wanted to do. My older son said that he wanted to make cookies for his mum. So we spent this morning doing that today. So and although that's Mother's Day is tomorrow, there was the cat was out of the bag. Like, she knew that was happening, obviously. We weren't going to keep these cookies away for a day. So, we enjoyed one. I had one cookie and then like the crumblings of another one. And it was good. I enjoyed it. Those are the sort of things I try to not eat really at all or very often. But, once in a while it's nice to indulge, and that's just how it goes sometimes. And we're going to have those cookies in the house. I wish we didn't, but they are there. They will get consumed, and I'm sure it'll be very difficult for me to not have at least another one because they are delicious. That kind of sums up food and diet. Yeah, I hope that kind of is clear. Super important, super impactful. We're going to now move on to bit of exercise. So let's start off talking about exercise, and I have a few things to talk about during exercise. I'm going to start off with an article from Men's Health. There'll be a link to that, obviously, with all the other links. And this is about a gym owner influencer couple who assumed their life after kids would be easy to prioritize their working out schedules. So I'm guessing that they have a passive income because they're obviously owning the gym, and they have their influencer following, and they can probably still, create content around through the whole pregnancy journey as well. But yeah, they just assumed because of their life setup and their kind of flexibility, it would be easy to still work out as much as they did as beforehand. But then they had a wild revelation that wasn't going to be true. So they had a few tips. And I think this does kind of just set our conversation off well before we dive into a few different areas. So the three that I kind of pulled out of them was manage your intensity expectations. So you can't expect yourself to be able to go super, super hard and super, super intense maybe as you used to. Be okay with a weird schedule. Maybe it's the middle of the night. maybe it's afternoons, I don't know what it, but just be okay to try and find that time somewhere. And don't be afraid to ask for help. So they said, I guess help with looking after the kids if need be. So one thing I've seen quite a lot is a question in different forums about parenting, how to integrate workouts as a new father. I say to Grant, who has been a guest, we'll share some clips. I think his advice works out really well in this situation.
Most of the kids' swimming has been in our backyard pool,
right?
And now we've just this year, as a 12-year-old, we've signed my son up for some swimming correction things, because it's beyond what I know in the stroke, and we've only got the length of our pool is 8 meters. So,
right.
But almost everything that we've done has been, okay, go to the bottom of the pool, and we've picked up things, and we've wrestled, and we've done things in the water, and we've raced, and we've done things like that. So. And my 9-year-old daughter, just by virtue, she does one swimming lesson a week, and it's stroke correction. It's not really training. And again, that's because it's beyond me in terms of the technical aspects and of swimming. With jiu-jitsu, my son goes once or twice a week, but a lot of the time we wrestle on the trampoline. And I have I'll hold a soccer ball, and the two kids have got to kind of get the ball off me. And obviously I give it to them sometimes, but so that's how that happens. In terms, tennis would be an early exposure sport, and to be fair, we've probably missed the boat if we want, but they could still do it. So what I'm saying is we've exposed them to the sport. If we've signed them up for the sport, it's a bare minimum that we can get them there, because the expectation is we doing that at home, or that's happening with friends, and so forth. We've tried to stay away from my daughter does do dancing, and again, if you saw me dance, you'd understand why. We've got to, I can catch and kick most things, but I struggle to move my body in rhythm to in time with the rhythm. But yeah, so I haven't actually had to step back too much, because it's been quite game-based, quite unstructured in the backyard, or sometimes we clear the dining room, not the dining room table, the lounge room table, coffee table, and then we just wrestle on the mat, or we do something there, and that's how it is, rather than anything structured. And then that obviously means even when my kids do jiu-jitsu, most of the time I'm just chatting to other parents or something like that. And the only real thing that I'll involve myself in is if behavior is not good. The technical and tactical stuff, that's all up to the coach. So that's been quite easy for me.
Yeah, it sounds like a very deliberate approach to ensure that things are remaining fun. And I think what I really like about what you've just shared, that maybe isn't super obvious, at least maybe to you, is that this is probably not the tougher one, but it's more involved. It's probably easier for a parent to sign their kids up to lots of different classes and drive them around and drop them off for 2 hours Tuesdays and Thursdays for classes here, there, and everywhere for football and tennis and rugby or whatever it might be. But you're kind of being deliberate about, I'm here, we can do this stuff, we can make our home fun, we can get involved with sports, and we can make it a whole holistic approach to it. Which I think is not the easy way to do. I think a lot of people might find it easier. It's let's free up our Tuesday evening by dropping the kids off at swimming or whatever.
Yeah. No, it is true. And it has been quite deliberate, because in my career, so I think this is my 25th or 26th year of coaching, and obviously there's been a fair amount of junior athletes. I've seen the ones who peaked at age 12. Wow. Or peaked at age 14 or whatever. And, there was a kid that I worked with who loved rugby, and he graduated school and he got a contract with a professional team, and he lasted 4 days with his professional team, and he was just sick of it. He was just like, I've had too much of it. And I was a much younger coach then, and I was probably even part of the problem. He wanted to train. I said, let's go train. Now my approach is I want to hold you back as much as possible. I want to get you to do it's called the mini-max approach, the minimum effort for the maximum result. So if you can give me 2 sessions a week and we can get 80%, well, I'm not going to go for 3 sessions and get 90%. Minimum effort, 2 sessions for 80, way better than, 3 sessions for 90. And so I've seen all that. And so from my side, I think it's way more important just to interact and engage with the kids and love them and play, and they'll have a way healthier outlook on life. I'm hoping. Who knows? In a few years' time, it could all backfire.
Well, no, I think I think they will have a healthier approach for sure. And I think, yeah, that's because it's something that I'm interested in, because I have younger kids that are not at that stage yet of getting involved in things. And I've said to a few guests before, like the approach of getting them involved in something outside of like their normal class, whether that be music or sport or even like a hobby, like a building hobby, like a STEM hobby or whatever it might be. And that kind of just like not the trying to teach them determination and the kind of thoroughness, let's say, of not wanting to quit on something. And I think that's a very valuable thing to teach kids. But yes, if it's like this, like you're talking about with these academies or hyper focus, train this, train that, I'm sure that some very stressful stories involved there. So you said maximum effort for maximum output, or minimum effort for maximum output.
Minimum, yeah.
So what's the tips for the dads out there that need that minimum effort for maximum output? What does that look like for their health?
Oh, okay. So you know the analogy of the big rocks? You've heard of that analogy where the professor stands in front of the class and he's got like a big beaker or something, and he puts some rocks in the beaker and he says, "Is this full?" And the class go, "Yes." And then he manages to put in some pebbles and he shakes in the pebbles, kind of filling, says, "Is this full?" And he says, "Yeah." And then he puts in some sand, so smaller things, and then the sand still fits in, even though at each stage it looks like it's full. And apparently in this story, he also then puts in a beer and he says, no matter how full your beaker is, there's always time for a beer. But anyway, the big rocks analogy is something that I'd be looking at. And so in terms of minimum effort, I mean, for maximum results and a physical and the health perspective, you'd be looking at if everyone could get 2 strength training sessions in a week, go to the gym, strength training, train your upper body, train your lower body twice a week, probably for a maximum of an hour, so 30 minutes each. In fact, this is what we offer in our gym. Our adult memberships are 30-minute sessions, total body. We've got only 2 memberships, twice a week and 3 times a week. That's the only thing that you can choose. And I would say 95%. I'm trying to get most people just to commit to 2 sessions a week. If you can do that, build some strength, build some muscle, and you can, and the dentist appointment never comes in that, like, never sort of cancels out your gym. So like, it's just prioritized. That over years is going to give you way better gains than these 8-week boot camps and, you know, the fitness challenge over here and kind of super motivated. Like, Laurence, you know that the vast majority of people will not will not finish 12 weeks of their program. So this is why all these big commercial gyms want to sign you up for a year at a very low cost. And then it's actually when you call up and you realize you haven't been there for 3 months and you try to cancel, they make it almost impossible to cancel. You know, put you on hold and fill out this form, and you go, oh man, it's too different. Anyway, coming back to the big rocks, coming back to the mini-max principle, if every dad could just go 2 sessions a week, full body, and when I say full body, I'm talking about the exercise like a dumbbell bench press, a push-up, an incline press. These will all be your pushing muscles. Then you'd flip over and do your pulling muscles. So this would be like a chin up, seated row, lat pull down, something along those lines. And then some kind of leg exercise, squat, lunge, or deadlift. If you could do that, you know, one of those 3 categories, you could throw in some extra stuff like more some trunk work, whatever. Do that twice a week, build some muscle. Maximum total time in the gym would be an hour. In fact, if your gym session is longer than 45 minutes and you're not an elite athlete, you're not training hard enough. But in 45 minutes, you've done enough. You should have done enough. Otherwise, you spend too much time scrolling social media, or you're just not working hard enough. So that there's a very simple mini-max principle that will have massive benefits on your cardiac health, your blood work, muscle gain, insulin response.
So even if you factor in 30 minutes each time for getting to the gym, setting up, you know, this seems doable. It doesn't take away from our responsibility too much. And as a new dad, it's not a good idea to expect 7 to 10 hours a week yourself to continue a workout routine if that's what you were doing before. But if you can go in mindfully, I'm going to do 30 minutes of exercise, 30 minutes of weight training. I'm going to go hard. I'm going to do it quickly. I'm going to get my heart rate up, going to get moving, going to lift big weights, and then I'm going to be done. Think about 30 minutes for showering and driving or getting to the gym, whatever that might be, 2 hours a week. So you try and package it into partner, wife, or even the babysitter or parents looking after the kid, whatever it might be. I'm going to start by having these 2 hours to myself, and I'm going to make sure that it happens. And this is a really important thing, I think, when it comes to communication about needs and wants, when it comes to personal satisfaction, something like a workout or exercise routine. You need to keep to that 2 hours. If you say to your partner, I'm going to have an hour on this day and an hour on this day to do this, that hour can't turn into an hour and a half, because then that's going to cause friction and difficulties in your partnership. So keep to that hour. If it's not enough, if you want to increase it, then you have to also make that plan, make that communication. But I think that's a really good starting point to ensure that you're staying mobile and you're weight training in some way. Because I think what Grant said is super valuable, that we've got to be lifting weights. We've got to be getting stronger. We've got to be challenging our bodies. Like, I really enjoy cycling, and I think, walking is obviously a great thing. Like, staying active, staying moving is really important. But, we've got to challenge our bodies, and our kids will grow, and we've got to try and grow with them in a good way. So a previous guest we had on is Daniel. He is a former gym owner as well, and exercise was super important to him. So I was super surprised, amazed when I learned of his schedule and how he makes things work in his life.
I get up a little bit before 4, and let me be very clear. I tell people, I'm an early morning person. I do believe that the earlier you can get up, the more productive you can be. But I also have clients and people that are really successful get up at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. So you don't have to get up super early. I always say it's not really about the time of day you get up, but it's what you do with those early morning hours that make the biggest difference. But for me personally, I get up at 3:49. I know it's a really weird time. It's just this weird thing that I have. I get up at 3:49 in the morning time. And another system I like to share, Laurence, is that a lot of people hit the snooze button. And I believe that the snooze button is one of the most dangerous buttons on your phone, because one is, we know that when you hit the snooze button, you don't get any better quality sleep, and you're already breaking commitment to yourself first thing in the morning. You're already going into reactive mode. So I'm a big believer in not hitting the snooze button. So one thing that I do, because again, like everybody else, I'm very tempted to hit the snooze button at 3:49 in the morning time. I put my phone across the room, so I have to literally get up, and I jump up out of bed because I don't want my alarm to wake up my wife. And so I'll jump up out of bed super quickly, turn the alarm off, right? And that way yes, I can still go back to bed, but I'm already up, right? It sort of gets that dopamine going, that energy going, that blood flowing. And so I just start my day. But I also say that a successful morning starts the night before. So I do a lot of my morning prep the night before. And it's simple things like I'll lay out my clothes that I'm going to wear the next morning. I'll put it on my sink counter. That way I don't have to think about what am I going to wear today. It's already laid out. I have my bag packed. I have my water bottle packed. I literally can turn my alarm off, and I can get out of the house in 10 minutes or less early in the morning, because I just have everything planned out and prepared. So I get up, I'll get ready, and then I actually go to Starbucks. So for me, luckily my local Starbucks opens up at 4 a.m. I'm a Starbucks junkie. Don't worry, I don't drink lattes. I get black coffee, but I'll go to Starbucks and I'll get work. I know, right? I'll get work done from 4 to 6 a.m. So about 2 hours of magic time work. And then the gym that I work out at is literally like 2 miles from Starbucks. So I'll go work out and I'll come back to the house. And then that's usually around 7 o'clock or so. And then I will take my older son, or not my older son, my son he's in a 4K academy program. He has to be dropped off at 8 o'clock. So I'll take him to school, and then I'll come back and then hang out with my wife. Usually we'll take our 15-month-old daughter, who's obviously still at home with us. We'll take her for a walk, and then I'll get breakfast. So then about 9 o'clock until about 4 o'clock, it's either coaching calls, podcasts like this, meetings, email coaching, product development, whatever it may be. But at 4 o'clock, I have a very hard rule, Laurence, where I don't take any work commitments after 4 o'clock. And again, I have to set those boundaries. And I'll let my wife know, if you see me setting appointments or work after 4, call me out, because that's like a hard rule for me. So that way from 4, we put our kids down at 7 o'clock. So from 4 to 7, I've got 3 hours of just fun family time, obviously eating dinner.
And I find his outlook really inspiring. He seems to think you can have it all. The hard work in your career, the quality time with the kids, quality time with your wife, exercise, eating healthy. It just requires system and discipline, and often waking up very early. And I think in my conversation with Daniel and my kind of reflection, And what I realized, how he kind of achieves this is to really, really minimize the true distractions in our lives, whether it be like scrolling Instagram or going on like a video game on our phone, or, you know, whatever it might be, whatever nonsense distraction that isn't actually fulfilling in any way, not building you up. If you actually if you look at the minutes and the hours of what that is, you take that away and give it to your wife, or you give it to your kids, or you give it to your exercise routine, you're going to have some really good outcomes. And it's not easy. Like, I'm not here saying it's easy. I'm not here saying that I am as disciplined or routine as Daniel is. I'm not here saying that I've got the perfect system either, but you try certain systems in place and you try and make it work. Habit stacking is really useful, a really important thing. So when I try to really make sure that I get my exercise in during the week, I normally aim to do 2 weight training sessions a week, like what Grant was saying. I try and do 1 HIIT training session as well, a high intensity interval training workout. And I try and do at least 1 bike ride, like on my road bike, like a decent ride. And I also stay active in other ways, riding my bike feeds. When I say riding my bike feeds, that's the cargo bike with the kids. I was riding that around. It keeps me active, taking them to school and going around to shopping and things. That's a really good way for me to stay active, at least. We're going to talk a little bit more about avoiding sedentary behavior and staying active as opposed to exercise and working out. But just on the strength training, working out, having your system in place, my 2 strength training sessions will come normally on a Sunday and a Tuesday. I haven't had to move it if I'm like not feeling well, if I'm sick, or, you know, whatever other situation comes up. So it might be a different day. Normally it's always Sunday and then a weekday. And the system I have in place to make sure I actually do it is that my wife does the bath time with my kids. So during that time, I get out the mat that I have, the mat that the weights go on. I get out the barbell. I get out just my kind of warming up weights, like the 5 kilo plates. I put that on the bar. I get my workout gear on and I'm ready to go, because I then go and do the bedtime with the kids. So as soon as the bedtime's done, as soon as I'm happy that they're good, I come out into the bedroom and my weights are already set up. I'm already in the workout gear and I can do a quick warm up and go. There's no kind of hanging about. I'm not going to get distracted and try and watch something on Netflix or do whatever. And I'm not going to be, I can't be bothered to set it up, because it's already set up. And that's the system I have in place to make sure that happens. And I feel so good that I've been doing that for like consistently for a few weeks. Even actually when I had that conversation with Grant, I had really fallen off the wagon, let's say, of actually doing my strength training. I had all the weights under my bed and they were just getting dusty. They weren't being used. So I found the system worked, and it's just about putting that into place and being consistent with it, showing up. You might have some rubbish workouts, but just make it work. And for me, I can't get to a gym. I don't want to spend time getting to a gym, but, you know, for you, that might be what you need. A couple of studies I just want to quickly talk about. Interestingly, one was in Chile and one was in Brazil. And they found that there was a direct correlation between physical activity behaviors in parents and how that is passed on to their children. And just to quote the study from Chile, it said the practice of regular physical activity by mothers and fathers can significantly influence their children. This influence could also be mediated by the intensity and type of activity performed, mainly by the habits of time shared in situations of physical activity in the form of games or sports. The sedentary behavior of mothers and fathers impacts their children in various dimensions of their development. So sedentary behavior is essentially, I guess, just sitting down, not moving, and that's kind of it. There's not really much else to it. Getting in your car, driving here, sitting at a desk, getting in your car, driving home, getting into your house, sitting down, reading or watching or whatever it might be, not moving. And I had a guest, Matt Cook. I've had a few Matts on the show, but Matt Cook, he had a really interesting tip for avoiding sedentary behavior.
What you want to do, though, is set up your life so you're not sitting around. That's the big thing. So I'm talking to you from a standing desk. I walk around. I have my life very portable. A lot of people think that they have to be on the computer all the time and therefore they have to sit. And it is true what they say about sitting. It's probably nothing worse than spending our life just sitting most of the time. Do you agree? That's probably a bad thing, right? Very, very bad thing. So if you could set your life up where you have to walk around. Now there's dictation things. There's apps for dictating. There's all kinds of things you can do. So I walk around, and like the other day, I did 9 miles and I never left my house. I couldn't leave because I was really busy with meetings, but I got 9 miles done. And today I'll get about 5 miles. So it's not so bad. You know, you just structure your life so that you're active.
And I found that really interesting, because I've obviously heard of people that have the treadmill under their desk that they're walking, but I've always found that there seems to be such a big commitment. But yeah, Matt is saying that he can, get up miles from walking around whilst he's on his calls and things. So definitely something to think about. if that's something that might work for you. Standing desk, important. Maybe the treadmill's a good idea. I'm not sure. I've never used one of those things, but just staying active. As I said, I find my activity. I find my general physical activity from riding the cargo bike with my kids around, taking them to school, doing the shopping. And so I find it very easy to get up to about 30 minutes of physical activity before even doing a workout. So yeah, it's really important. Maybe you want to go for walks. I know that Daniel, who I played a clip from earlier here, even had a thing called a micro walk.
Yes. So this is another part of my health systems here, is that we all understand the benefits and the power of walking, right? Like, and obviously for your health reasons, but also for mental clarity. I mean, most of us are staring at a computer screen all day. We're sitting down for a lot of the day. So, I would always tell myself, like, well, go take a 30, 45, 60-minute walk, right? That's what we were sort of conditioned growing up, like take these long walks. I don't have 60 minutes in the day with 3 kids, businesses going, I didn't have time to find for a 45 or 60-minute walk. And so I would start taking a walk, and I'd find myself like turning around or stopping my walk short. And I would get frustrated with myself, feeling like I was a failure. I'm like, well, what if I could take these shorter walks? And instead of just taking one long walk, what if I could take like 3 or 4 mini walks throughout the day and get the same benefits, but multiple times throughout the day? And so I created this thing that I call, and I don't know if I made this up, but I came up with micro walks. And so the idea is that, 3 to 4 times during the day, take 5 to 15-minute walks, short walks, and try to plan them out in your schedule. So it's like, morning time walk, midday walk, afternoon walk, even an evening walk. And, whether you go walk by yourself, you could take your dog. A lot of times I'll push my kid in the stroller. But it's just a really, really great way to get more movement throughout the day, take a break from the computer screen. And for me, at least, Laurence, I find some of my best ideas and creativity come when I'm walking. And so just being able to get more active and take more walks, preferably outdoors. Like I get if you live in a cold weather, you could walk on a treadmill or walk around, inside of a building or something like that. But ideally get outside, get some sunlight, get some fresh air. And it's had a huge impact on my life the last year and a half. And I've shared with a lot of my coaching clients as well who also love it.
Even just getting outside, walking for about 5 minutes can really help if you can, factor that in. It's easy to start small. You don't need to start big. And we heard from Grant earlier, and he also talks about the need to avoid inactivity, frequent moving, as well as actual.
It's one thing to train. That's 100% important. But I call that physical exercise. The other one is physical activity. And the simple thing there is get your 10,000 steps. If you look at the evidence, the 10,000 steps was really good, but the benefits increased at 11, 12, 13,000. I think up to 17,000 steps, you're still getting benefits. So, if you can do that, and that's accumulative over the day. So it doesn't have to be, hey guys, wife, whatever, I'm going out for 2 hours to get these. It could be before breakfast, before the kids wake up. It could be middle of the day. It could be over your lunch break. It could be, way you set it up your day.
So we mentioned earlier that there was an intervention based on targeting dads and their kids in Australia when it comes to kind of improving physical activity. I actually found another study that looked at this as well, that ran an intervention aimed at getting dads and kids active. They called it Run Daddy Run. That was the intervention that they planned. And they found that it had very, very positive results. And to quote from this study, it says, targeting fathers together with their children might be a novel and potential intervention strategy to improve overall physical activity levels. So again, this just comes back to making space for fathers to do things with their kids. I currently don't have much of that because my kids are quite young, but obviously once they're a bit bigger, I'm hoping to get them involved with bike rides and different sports and things. And obviously me getting involved with what they're interested in, not necessarily the other way around. But it is valuable to obviously address that. I'm interested in cycling. I quite like football. I'm interested in weights. Obviously weights would be a long way away. But there is that shared interest. Like we as parents need to show interest in what they're doing and come to them. But it's a great idea to get them involved in what we're doing because we're passionate about it and they see that passion and it's worthwhile. So that kind of sums up the exercise. I hope that's impactful and useful. Get your weight training in. If you can do something with your kids, great. And just stay active. Let's avoid the sedentary behavior. And, as I said, if you're feeling targeted in any way, try and start small. Starting small is the best way to get things implemented and into a routine. One final, very short aspects I'm going to talk about. We've spoken about friendships, mental health. We've spoken about diet and food, and we've spoken about exercise. This is a smaller section that we're just going to talk a little bit about hobbies and what hobbies can have a role on physical health and mental health and just father's health in general. So I tried to do some research into this. There's not really many studies that look into it and the need for it, a need for a hobby or whatever. But I did think it was important to mention here. I did find an interesting blog post by someone that was just talking about why dad hobbies are important. And just to kind of steal from this blog post, obviously link will be up there too, go check it out if you want to read more, if you're interested in diving a little bit more. You give some really good examples and ways you can involve kids if need be. So yeah, the main reasons, the highlights: mindful distraction, release of endorphins, sense of accomplishment, personal growth. These are things that are super valuable for us to keep growing, keep achieving. And this could be through something like woodworking, crafting, art, painting, music, even hiking, riding bike, or, an interest in cars. He does mention video games, and I understand video games being in there, and I think it can be a good way to unwind. And, I think I mentioned this in the other Dad Diary Deep Dive where we spoke about television and video games in more detail. I have a lot of experience with video games, and I just really hesitate to recommend video games to anyone, just ensuring that the amount of time goes into it, and you can't be just, at some point it's past the point of diminishing returns in terms of how many hours you might put into something and what the output actually is. I think it's a good way to unwind every now and then, but I would kind of classify a video game in a slightly different realm of maybe something like woodworking or music making, because I think those things can achieve just a little bit more, have something to show, have something to be proud of. Hiking and cycling, they can get your exercise in as well at the same time. So yeah, video games can be a hobby, and especially if you're socializing through them, then maybe that's a useful thing. But obviously that's another whole other realm, and finding time for that as a father can be very difficult if you're at home. But yeah, it was something that they mentioned. I just often think of, can you get that satisfaction through a quick 30 minutes on a mobile game or something? Or I'm not sure. It's obviously up to your input and your processing of the situation. If you think video games are a useful hobby, again, you can go watch the other Dad Diary Deep Dive to hear more about video games. So I think it's really important to how to address this with your wife and your partner. How to manage times, kids is super important, and plan things out. For example, you might have in your calendar that Tuesday and Thursdays are your hobby evenings. You need your 2 hours to do whatever it might be, and your wife needs to look after the kids, or you need to get your babysitter in, or whatever it might be, and you have that in place, and the expectations are there every week. And I think that's a useful thing to make sure that's happening. It makes you more accountable to keep doing it as well, especially if it's something like a creative endeavor like woodworking or music making or podcast making that you want to make sure it actually happens. I know personally it can be difficult to get the gumption to actually come together and do this podcast filming and editing and things. It can be a lot of work at times when there's obviously a lot of stuff going on, and sometimes I'd rather just sit in front of the TV and veg out. But the satisfaction comes through making things and following through. So I did find the research into hobbies was interesting, because I found studies that were into the father's mental health and discussed the symptoms of losing interest in hobbies is when someone might be suffering from a mental illness. So I found that really interesting, that any scholarly article I looked at was primarily looking at mental health, identifying mental health symptoms. And yeah, it only ever mentioned, a sign of someone having a depressive symptoms or bouts of anxiety might be a loss of interest in their hobbies. So I found that really interesting. Can we kind of flip that lens around and say, can I increase my interest in my hobbies to ensure that I don't get depressive symptoms or have bouts of anxiety, rather than I've lost interest in my hobbies, therefore I have depressive symptoms or bouts of anxiety? Can I flip it around? So, before it's too late, put the time and effort in, make it happen, start that project, whatever it might be. So those are some of the key areas that we're going to talk about. There's a couple more things I'm just going to talk about at the end here. Longevity is one thing. I didn't mention it earlier, but longevity is the real reason for this research. And I know I did mention a little bit of my story at the start. This is why I chose this as a topic to dive into, because I'm just often thinking about it, and rather than having anxiety about my own personal health, my own longevity, I thought, can I do something about it? Can I do research, and can I make something about it, like a podcast episode? So I found an interesting article. There's not a huge amount if you look into father's longevity, but I found this article that said that fathers who have daughters tend to live longer. And it says there is a significant correlation that was observed between the number of daughters and paternal longevity. The study's key finding indicates that fathers with daughters tend to live longer lives, with an intriguing trend emerging. The more daughters a father has, the longer he is likely to live. In fact, the data suggests that for each daughter born, a father's lifespan extends by an average of 74 weeks. Like a year and a half, a year and a third or something. Like crazy. As a dad to two boys, I was just like, why? Just wild, just absolutely wild. And this was over 4,300 individuals. So it was looking at longevity for male and female, and the fathers involved. There was 2,100 fathers, which I think is important to talk about. I guess a small sample size, but not insignificant, 2,000. And obviously there are other things at play. So I'm not saying if you've got two kids who are boys, like try and go and have another one, try and make sure it's a girl. I'm not saying that. But this was pretty much the only thing that I found that mentioned the word longevity when looking at fathers' health. So I thought it was interesting to mention. And yeah, it would be curious to see if they were able to build on this research in any way. But yeah, there's not really much other research that mentions any strategies and things that can be done. It's just analysis of what has been done before, what's come in terms of like what's the health of systems in place, which I guess is understandable. Now, as we kind of wrap up, I'm just going to take time to share a couple of longer clips from a few previous guests. As we're talking about health, there are two key stories that really come to mind. And I think they're relevant here for information, as we talk about sharing experiences and having different voices rattling around in our brain. I would like to provoke some thought into them and how we may respond in a similar situation if things were to come up. So there are two people I'm going to share. If you've listened to the interviews before, you might know these stories. They're Justin and Khaled. First, we'll talk about Justin. So Justin's wife had a long-winded health problem, and Justin had to support his kids through that situation.
It all started with, a bout of strep throat of all things. Back in 2010, my wife was dealing with strep throat. She kept getting it. Never had her tonsils taken out. So the doctor said, well, the only way the strep's ever going to go away for good is if we took your tonsils out. We're like, okay, well, that's fine. We'll go ahead and do that. We'll get that surgery set up. We'll get that taken care of. And so in the middle of January of 2011, she's going to have her tonsils taken out. Well, the day before the surgery was to take place, she ends up, I end up coming home. I make it home before she does that day. And our house is flooded because our pipes burst in our home. And so this is this is not the time for this. My wife's about to have surgery. This just isn't going to work because they had to shut the water off. They had to do, the house wasn't going to be livable for the next few days. It just wasn't. And my wife needed to recover from surgery. So, what ends up happening is my in-laws end up coming over. They live about 2.5, 3 hours away from us. They come over, and after her surgery, they take her back with them so she can recover at home. And while that was going on, I was living with my grandparents, who I just mentioned that my son stayed with, trying to, coordinate getting all the stuff that needs to be taken care of the house. And it worked out really well. My mother-in-law, was glad to take my wife back so she could be a mom again, and she could baby her and help get her nurse her back to health. And all that was great. But the one thing that it did cause is she wasn't moving. My wife was barely getting up. She wasn't doing anything. So she ends up developing a blood clot in her leg. And they end up missing it at first, but they eventually do catch it. And because they missed it the first time, it ended up being a lot worse than probably should have been. Her leg swells up to just an obscene amount that you've never seen before. It was just it looked absolutely awful. It was painful. She could barely walk on it. But they do surgery. They get rid of it. She makes full recovery. She didn't have any issues with it again until about 18 months later, after we have our daughter. She has some issues with it then. But then for 10 years, she's good. For 10 years, she has no issues. She's on medication. And then one of the reasons that she ended up getting this clot is because she has a anatomical, what's the word? There's something in her anatomy where it's called May-Thurner syndrome, where a vein sits on top of a artery. I can't remember which ones it is, but and it's higher up in her leg. So that's one of the reasons it got missed. But this is why she ends up getting clots, is because of this anatomical not defect, but like just anomaly, I guess is the best way to put it. So she doesn't have any problems with it for 10 years. And in 2022, she ends up getting another one. And we think they do the surgery, they get rid of it. So we think we're good. And then in August of last year, she gets another clot and they do the surgery. But 2 days later, it's right back. And so they do another surgery. 2 days later, it's right back. And we're like, we can't do this. This isn't working. So they end up putting her in the hospital for a few days. And the hospital here doesn't know what to do with her at this point because she just keeps getting clots. So they just let her sit there for like 3 days. And while clots are just constantly building up in her leg and nobody's doing anything. Thankfully, a person who lives in our neighborhood, he is a VP at one of the hospitals here in the Memphis area. He's like, we've got a vascular department. If you want a really good vascular department, if you want me to get you an appointment, I can. And then we're like, please do something. And once we met with the doctor, they did some MRIs, they did CAT scans, they did all this type of stuff. And he said, the doctor that we met with is like, because they let it go so long, there's not a whole lot we can do for you. It's the clots are now completely, your leg is just like 100% fully clogged at this point. He said there is a Hail Mary procedure that we can try and, we'll just give it a shot. But if not, there's not much we can do. Well, we didn't know what to do at this point. We're like, she can't live like this. And he's like, I understand. He said, but we'll give this a shot. And if it works, then we can do a bypass. And the bypass would be a very extensive bypass where they had to take certain arteries and veins from her leg and like move them to her other one and like reroute the way the blood flows. So this is what we were hoping would actually end up working, but we were told it had almost no shot of working. Well, when she goes in for surgery, it ends up taking 10 hours. They actually did making it work. And it was a blessing that it made it work, but it also ended up like forcing her into this massive recovery. So she's basically spends the next 6 months in and out of the hospital. She had numerous infections throughout the course of the period, because of all the trauma that she went through, all the wound care that she has to go through and all this type of stuff. So like I said, I think we're in the hospital 5 different occasions, probably spent about 2 total months in the hospital over the next 6 months. And this is, like I said, she recovered and she's much better now. She still is not 100%. We don't know if she'll ever be 100%. That's a very difficult thing for her, to have to wrestle with and to struggle with mentally and physically. But she's, like I said, she's alive and she's able to walk. She didn't lose her leg. So these are all things that we were afraid that might end up happening. But it was a long, arduous recovery, and it was very difficult. Just on the emotional toil of going through that on her was very difficult. And for me, I was trying to balance, being with her, taking care of the kids, being at work, because like I said, this was all taking place during the school year. So there was a lot of stuff that was trying to juggle it, trying to make everything work was always difficult. It was never easy. But it was always, this is what's going to happen. And I was very thankful that our kids were old enough that they could kind of take care of themselves. My son was 16 at the time. He turned 17 in February of this year. He picked up a lot of slack. My daughter has always been an incredibly independent child. And she's like, I'll just take care of myself. I'm good. Y'all don't need to worry about me. So that's always been really nice. And that helped out a lot. Because like I said, it's very difficult to try to have to be, be with your wife. And when you're with your wife in the hospital and she's recovering and you're getting emails and texts from parents about why kids are doing whatever it is in class, I'm like, I don't know. I'm not there. I wish I could be there. So like I said, juggling all that was incredibly difficult, incredibly stressful, but ultimately worth it all because she was able to make, for the most part, a full recovery. Like I said, her leg will never be what it was before all this took place, and that's a difficult thing for her to handle. But I do my best to try to reassure her that she's better off than so many people would have been in her similar situation. So it was a struggle to say the least.
And obviously, that is the health of a partner. That's not the health of the father. But I thought it was an important thing to talk about because these are another one of those things that might come up in some of our anxieties. I know I think about it sometimes. So I just wanted to share a bit of Justin's story. I think that was really important. And the other person I want to mention was Khaled. Khaled was diagnosed with a type of thyroid cancer actually before having kids.
Yeah. So as part of the funny thing is, we had already been talking about it. We'd been married for about 4 years at this point. And we had talked about, we wanted to start thinking about having kids, and I think this definitely accelerated it.
Right.
As part of the radiation therapy, I could not conceive. I had to sign like a paper thing and said, if I was to conceive within the next 6 months, it would have to be aborted because of the radiation in my body. So that was a crazy thought and a crazy conversation to have with my doctor and my wife. Yeah. But, we decided kind of, okay, as soon as we get that sign off, I think, this has been a little bit of a wake up call. Like, we want to have kids now. I want to be able to experience that, just in case this does come back or it does lead to something else. Cause, once the cancer's in your body, you never know when it could pop up, if it pops up again. So it kind of accelerated the clock on it. And in terms of my outlook, I mean, I think it might be kind of cliche, but you have this brush with your own mortality, right? You hear that word, you have cancer, that phrase. It doesn't matter what type or where it is or what stage. It's just, it really rocks your foundation, rocks your core. And you have to reevaluate things. And I think that was a big turning point in our relationship. Not to say that we weren't happy before that and we weren't, happy with each other, but I think it really minimizes some of the other stuff, the extra stuff, the things that we may have fought about before just becomes like, oh, that's not even a big deal. So it gives you a lot of perspective on what really matters in life and wanting to spend time with family and, maybe scratch off a couple items on that bucket list and not worry so much about credit card debt, things like that. So it really did. It was obviously a big moment in my life, and of course a huge moment and a huge nexus point in my marriage as well.
So yeah, I found it super interesting that was a kind of the wake up call for him, and then he kind of, all right, now's the time to have kids, and he's now able to live his life. He's still impacted by the fact he doesn't have a thyroid, like he said, but he's now healthy and happy, and he's got an amazing young family. So yeah, a really nice story, and I was really appreciative for Khaled as well to be on the show. So these short clips will give you a brief insight. I'd encourage you to go and watch the full episodes if you'd like to. Obviously, if they're available wherever you listen to your normal podcast. There'll be links up in the description as well, in that long list of links. Yeah, I find hearing these stories really empowering, as it can take away some of the fear of the unknown, when looking at these kind of scary situations of like a wife getting sick or, the hearing a cancer diagnosis. So I think hearing these actually in-person stories can take away some of that fear, and I'm really appreciative to these people for coming on the show. That kind of sums up the Dad Diary deep dive into father's health and longevity and all the different aspects of health. I hope you've got something from it. If you have got something from it, please do be sure to leave me a comment, send me a message about what your favourite part from this episode was. I'd really love to hear from you. I think that we as men and fathers do need to, make the steps now to extend our life, and not just the length of our life, but obviously the quality of our life. I don't want to be that dad who's not able to keep up with my kids when they want to play football with me or go bike riding with me or whatever it might be. So that's really important to me. And that was something I never really thought about before becoming a dad, in terms of like longevity and the impact that we have on other people as we grow up and get older. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed listening or watching to this episode of the Dad Diary Deep Dive. Thanks so much. I hope to talk to you again soon.